Without anything further to do, I'd like you to welcome, once again, John C. from Brownwood, Texas.
Thank you very much, Howard. I introduced myself once. I guess that maybe some of you have just come in. I think the most everybody else has left. My name is John Carlton, and I'm an alcoholic. My sobriety date's October 28, 1951. And I have maintained that period of time without the use of any alcohol or mood-changing women or any other things that might interfere. And in my belief in a power greater than myself, that I prefer to call God as I understand Him, and some effort upon my part at times, and the help of folks just like you, and some of you here. Now, the usual question that's asked anybody that goes out and does any talking is, when you do you use the same talk? Do you have a manuscript? Do you fellas say the same things everywhere you go? Now, I assure you I have no manuscript. But I have a reason why that I don't write anything down, because sometimes it don't sound the same as when you write it. I practiced law for 21 years, and I know whereof I speak in that matter. But I come from Maine originally. Now, I don't want to mislead you. I've been in Texas for 31 years, but I still cannot get that lingo of over yonder, and I reckon so. I'm fixing to leave. Y'all come. And I was out there 15 years before they got a pair of big boots on me and a hat. And by golly, they haven't got me on a horse yet, and they're not going to. So I'm a maniac by birth. And up there, back there, we have some of these preachers that are pretty strong. Come on, pretty strong. And one of these men was an old-timer, and he was getting ready to retire, and he was preparing a young man to take over his church. And he said to him, "Now, Albert, your first sermon, if you have a mental block, just pick up another passage of the Bible and go right on. The congregation won't notice it. Go right on. But there's one thing I strongly urge you to do, and that is to write down the activities for your week that follows." And he stressed it very strongly, and the young man on his first Sunday got along very beautifully with his sermon, and he said, "And now I would like to read to you the activities for the coming week." And he picked up the paper and he said, "The Women's Club will meet on Monday, and Sister Smith will sing a solo entitled 'Put Me in My Little Bed.' She'll be accompanied by her preacher. On Tuesday, the Little Mothers Club will meet. And any of you ladies wishing to become little mothers, meet your preacher in the study. Now, on Wednesday, services will be held at both ends of the church, the north end and the south end. And all of the little children will be baptized at both ends. Then on next Sunday, a special collection will be taken up to help defray the expenses on the new carpet. Now, any of you congregation wishing to do anything on the carpet, please pick up your paper at the altar. Now he says, we will close this meeting by all rising and singing Little Drops of Water. Now, if one of you good sisters will stand and quietly start it, we will all join in. Well, that's why that I don't have anything written out. I don't know. But you know, anything that is good is subject to criticism. And criticism sometimes is the lot of AA. Churches are criticized, able men are criticized, medicine in general is criticized. Anything that is good is criticized. Galileo was nearly put to death for his views. They said the Wright brothers never would fly, that the air was reserved for birds. And even Columbus was criticized. I don't know anything about Columbus other than what I studied as a young fellow in school, kid. And I don't know whether he was an alcoholic or not, but by golly, he had all the traits of one. He didn't know where he was going when he left home. He didn't know where he was when he got there. When he got back, he didn't know where the hell he'd been, and a woman paid for the whole trip. Now, before I say anything this morning, I don't know what you got me up here to talk for, starting with Beverly and then the two judges there, the man and his wife, my friends Cleve, and Nell, and Otto, and then with a lady that I've had the privilege of being on programs with every part of the country, Louise. They didn't leave too much for me to talk about. I think about the only thing left is for Jimmy and his crew to start sweeping up and we all go home. But I would like to make a couple of observations now that I'm here. And that is that anything that I may say to you this morning is simply my own opinion. I don't speak for Alcoholics Anonymous as a whole. Nobody's qualified to do that. I've heard in some parts of the country many of these guys get up behind here and you'd think they'd written a book. The only thing that I know and the only thing that I can tell you is that whatever I say is what I've heard someone else say or what I've read or if I've taken the time to study and then put in my own words. And I'm only qualified to talk about one thing, and that's me. I'm not qualified to stand here this morning and be the judge, jury, and executioner of a single one of you folks. And because that I have 31 years and a couple of my friends with 34, 5, I know that they, the same as I, are fully cognizant of the fact that we are just exactly the same as those two that come up here and got that book this morning with a few days. We are exactly the same as they are in this respect. We're simply that length of time and still like they, one drink away from a drunk. And I hope to God that I never forget it either. You know, when an occasion such as this gets together, I don't think that everyone that is responsible for this meeting this morning or since Friday was all done by alcoholics. I think that there was some of these gals and guys known as Al-Anons cooperated in this thing. And anywhere that I may go, and as I always say, I always pay my respects to the Al-Anons. For 9 years I wasn't interested in them. I had no one that was interested in them either. And as far as I was concerned, it was all right for you gals to come and bring the coffee and sandwiches and get over there in the corner and sit down and keep quiet. But I became interested in you after about 9 years, and I've come to learn to love and to respect you. And I think that the best way that I could possibly do what I feel like this morning, as far as you're concerned, is in the words of our co-founder Bill Wilson, who said to you at your first meeting in New York, in conjunction with your Canadian brothers and sisters, when you didn't have any idea whether you would ever get off the ground because you had met with a lot of opposition from us guys. We didn't want anybody going to tear down our dollhouse. We didn't know what you were going to do to us. And you didn't have much cooperation from us at the beginning. But this is what Bill Wilson said to you at that meeting. He said, Al-Anon is the biggest thing that has happened, in my opinion, since AA was started. And the reason for your phenomenal growth is due to your determination to fill that vast vacuum of family relationship. And family relationship is the most important, as we all realize. It is the most deformed. And I like to add these words of my own. I always say, blessed be the alcoholic who has a good Al-Anon mate to come home to, because some of us were not that fortunate. Now, by these few kind words, I don't want any of you gals to think you've got me snowed, because you haven't. I know that some of you have used some pretty harsh language and pretty harsh words, some pretty harsh actions, too, trying to get that blubberhead straightened around. But I'd like to tell you a true story. It's as true as I stand behind this podium, that involves two of my dear friends, or one has now passed away, God rest his soul, in Brownwood. Lance and Chris. Lance was at Vanderbilt University a couple of years before I was. He was an outstanding athlete. I didn't know him, however, until I moved to Brownwood. He weighed about 220 pounds, and he was built like an oak tree. And little Chris was a cute little thing, you know. She was about the size of Marilyn, sitting down here, weighing about 95 pounds with a wet pea coat on, you know. And Lance got hooked on this booze. And every day, practically, that he'd come home from work, he'd come in half fractured, or completely so. And little Christine was getting about to the end of the line. She wasn't going to put up with it any longer. And the spat started in the kitchen, continued into the living room, and she's given it to Lance in pretty good shape. And Lance decides that he's taken all of the abuse that he's going to. And he decides to commit suicide. So without saying anything to Chris, he goes in the bathroom, fills the tub with water, and turns the gas on. Little Chris gets curious, of course, and she goes to the bathroom door, raps on the door, tries it, locked. She says, Lance, what are you doing in here? And Lance says, I'm committing suicide. I got the gas turned on. She says, well, put some towels around the bottom of the door. It's making the cat sick. You know, Herbert Spencer once said there was a certain principle which was a bar of all information and proof against any argument that may leave a person in everlasting ignorance, and that principle is contempt before investigation. And you're looking at one of those individuals. Now, I could stand here and talk to you for a time that's allotted to me and talk to you as a professional athlete, or a former professional athlete, rather, or as a trial lawyer, 21 years experience. I don't know how in the hell so many of these drunken lawyers got in here. They talk about painters. I've met more drunken lawyers around here than painters. Or I could talk to you as some of my experiences in the United States Marine Corps in World War II, not the Spanish-American, World War II. Or I could talk to you as a present-day businessman, but that's not what I'm here for this morning. I want you to look at me as just plain John Carlton, another drunk that's found a way to stay sober through the teachings and the philosophy of this fellowship. I heard one of the boys say, one of them during the program, about scoffing. You heard he came to scoff but remained to pray. I wanted no part of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I wanted no part of anybody in it either. Now, I've heard these people say, well, I started drinking at the age of 10 or 12 or 15, and I got drunk from the first drink I ever took, and all this. Not me. I never took a drink of booze in my life. I never smoked tea. I never smoked anything, any type of tobacco. I never drank tea or coffee until I was 26 years of age. I trained all my life. And the last 5.5 years of my career was spent as a professional fighter. Some of my friends think I stayed in there a little too long as it was. But that's the way that I had to earn my education. Now, you know, sometimes when you get a degree or two behind your name, you think that you are a little superior to people. And fortunately or unfortunately, I have 2 degrees. So I couldn't come among folks like you. I couldn't come among folks like you because I was too intelligent. Now if there's any of you intellectual gorillas sitting out there today, I want to remind you of this. I heard somebody say when they were talking about degrees that they've got a lot of more degrees on those thermometers in your hospital up here at Grants Pass than we'll ever have. And you know where they stick those thermometers sometimes. Well, that's what you can do with those degrees if you think those degrees are going to help you any more than anyone who's never even been graduated from grammar school, because our program is written in plain cowboy language, and it's not written for these highly scientific and intelligent men and women. They're written for the benefit of everybody. And there's 164 pages in there that tells us the way in which we never have to drink again. But if you haven't got interest enough to read it, to hell with it. I'm not going to read them to you. No. This you do yourself. Intelligence is a great asset, provided that you have some humility to go with it. And that partnership can never fail to be successful, provided that you keep humility first. Ego was one of my greatest drawbacks. I'd held many positions of trust, and so my ego began to drip off me, and I finally came to the full realization of the proper definition of egotism after I came among you people. And the best definition of egotism is that it's the best anesthetic to help lessen the pain of stupidity. So I complained that roses had thorns instead of being grateful that thorns had roses. I knew that I was drinking too much booze too often, and I knew what the results were going to be if I kept at it. Just exactly the same as you who are alcoholics knew. I've heard these people say, oh yes, after I came into AA, why, all of my troubles were lifted from my shoulders. That's good. Good luck to you. But that wasn't my case. No. As I say, I wanted no part of you, and I wanted no part of anyone in it either. And I remember as a senior member of my law firm picking up the story of Jack Alexander that was in the Saturday Evening Post in 1941. But he wasn't talking about me. He was talking about the fellas that were sleeping down on the dock, the guys in the mission houses, the fellas in the Salvation Army spots, and the fellas that were riding the freight. He wasn't talking about the senior member of a law firm. He wasn't talking about a young lawyer who had held many positions of trust, including being a special assistant to the United States Attorney General in the Criminal Division of the Department of Justice. And he wasn't talking about a former personal political representative of one of our vice presidents the last 2 years that he was in Washington. He was talking about those fellows that I have already mentioned, and I tossed the magazine one side. And I went on drinking for 10 more years, and I'm not proud to stand here in Grants Pass today and tell you, ladies and gentlemen, that I traveled for 6.5 years under an assumed name. Nobody knew where I was, and I sought succor and maintenance from exactly those same places that Alexander wrote about in his story. I know what it is to come through a little town like Grants Pass on a stormy night and ask if I could sleep in the jail. I know what it is to seek succor and maintenance from the Salvation Army and the mission houses. You bet. And I hope to God that I never forget that either. When I came to you people devoid of all faith, devoid of all confidence, and devoid of all hope. People have said to me, John, you're getting old. Why do you keep traveling so much? Now, I'm not one of these so-called circuit riders. I call them reciprocity boys, you know. You ask me, you get me over to your place, and I'll get you back to mine. And they've said to me, why at your age you keep going? You know, you're getting old. Well, now I just look at life like this. Living a certain number of years, you don't grow old. It may wrinkle your skin. But when you lose that enthusiasm and desert your ideals is when it starts to wrinkle your soul. And you folks, call it what you will, I don't care. But through the God of my understanding, and the only way that I understand it is that by working through people such as you, you have restored to me my faith and my confidence and my hope. And so long as those wires stay intact to my heart, I will never grow old as long as I continue to try to carry the message to another sick alcoholic. The foundation stone of our program is the giving of ourselves to the service of others. But if and when, and God forbid, if those wires ever come down, and they come down as between you and me, and my heart becomes covered with the snows of criticism or the ice of cynicism, then and only then will I grow old, and may God rest my soul. That's what you folks have given to me. So why shouldn't I come here to Grants Pass, a place that I've learned to love in 3 years, and all the boys know how I feel? Why shouldn't I come here if I'm asked? Before I came up here, before I left the motel this morning, as I always do before I ever walk into any group, large or small, I ask God to give me the power to say something that might help one person here today who is suffering from the same illness that I am. An illness, and the only illness on the face of this earth, where the patient is blamed when the treatment fails. Oh, yeah. I was forced to stand on the curbstone of life and watch the throng pass me by during some of the most lucrative and productive years of my career. Because of one thing, I refused to listen. I knew it all. Just because I sat in the Mayflower Hotel that my sweet gal Louise, excuse me dear, I couldn't think of your name, I've only known you 20 years, that in the Mayflower Hotel with the Secretary of War, 2 of the presidential advisors, and 2 of the leading politicians in America, and I'm there in the advisory capacity to 5 New England governors. I knew it all. So what in the world could a thing called the Big Book or Alcoholics Anonymous? Christ, I thought that AA stood for Akron Acrobats. I don't know. And I refused to listen. And as a result of it, you know how I wound up. Now, I'm not going into any morbid details in my drinking. You've gone through, you've suffered all the morbidity. You don't need that at all. So don't expect any morbid details of my drinking or any Howard Cosell descriptions of my drinking bouts, because we'd be here till next week if you started that. I never was so disgusted in my life. I was coming back from Tucson, Arizona to Phoenix. It's about 11 o'clock at night, and I've got the radio on the car, and I hear someone say, one of these educated nuts, "Well, there's been a great discovery made." Well, I'm all ears. Relative to alcoholism. We have determined that the American Indian body chemistry is no different than that of the white man. My God Almighty, I never heard of an American Indian busting up 3 automobiles in one day. This guy with the 2 degrees did. I never heard of an American Indian falling out the second-story window of a hotel, and if it had been 30 stories, they'd have said I'd committed suicide. I never heard of an American Indian writing an acceptance speech for a very prominent, nationally known politician, and I'm supposed to have lunch with her and to meet her in the lobby of the hotel with a party, including a governor and a couple of congressmen. I joined them from the time that I finished getting this material ready and listening to her. Alcoholic, we know what the results are going to be if we drink it. So if you know what the answer is to a proposition, there is no problem as far as I'm concerned. But our problem is, and every single one of us sitting here today as arrested alcoholics, and everyone in this world, our problem is, how do we handle our sobriety? That's our problem. And if you found a way to stay sober, I say to you, don't you let anybody change it. I don't care a damn who they are. Keep this thing simple. And then you'll hear them say, well, oh, don't go with him. If you do, you'll get drunk. Don't you go with her. If you do, you'll get drunk. Right, that's like saying which is the better, exhale or inhale. Oh yeah, and you'll get it's surprising. I don't know where it come from. Late years, these water walkers, you know, these amen carnivores, they're all good. I'm going to say to you newer members, I'm going to give you a little advice this morning. You can take it or leave it. Don't try to get too good too soon, because it's only 6 inches from a halo to a noose. I'm not running for the Senate here. Well, here's something else. If you think you're coming in here and bless yourself, and that's all there is to it, and stay sober, no, that isn't going to do it. But, on the other hand, I didn't come in here to get saved. There are members of the cloth that are far more qualified to do the saving than I am or any of my pals. But I did come into this fellowship, as I say, devoid of the things that I mentioned, hoping to God that there'd be some way that I could change my lifestyle. That's what I come in this deal for. And when I come through the door, I don't care. I come through the doors of this group or any other group, large or small, and I'm sober. And when I leave sober, where I go, what I do, and who I do it with, as long as I remain within the decency of this program, that's none of your business. And by the same token, where you go and what you do and who you do it with, as long as you remain within the perimeter of the decency, don't hurt Alcoholics Anonymous as a whole. That's none of John Carlton's business either, and he's not going to stick his nose into it. It tells us, if you read in the big book or in the traditions, that fifth tradition is explains, shoemaker, stick to thy last. Let the preachers preach, and the doctors treat, and the educators educate. But let us remain with what we do best, and that is trying to carry the message to that still suffering alcoholic. That's in the fifth tradition. You look over in the sixth tradition, you'll see where it's explained that AA cannot be all things to all men, and neither should we try. This isn't a crusade movement. Of course not. But if that guy or that gal comes through the door of your group and they tell you that they are being bothered with alcohol, and that's all I know because I'm a rumhead. I'm not a junkie. And they tell you that they're having trouble with alcohol, I don't care whether they think this is a Lonely Hearts Club, whether they think this is an employment agency, or whether they think that they're coming in to make a touch like I did when I came in. If he or she tells you that they've got some alcoholic trouble, I beg of you this morning right here in Grants Pass, for God's sakes, extend that hand of kindness and consideration that was extended to me about 31 and a half years ago. That's one of our obligations. I hear these people say, oh, well, we don't have any obligation to AA. The hell we don't. You know, I've often said, I always say, when I come to a place, I always think, oh gosh, I'd love to come back and see exactly the same faces that I'm looking at this morning and those that I looked at last night. I thought of it last night, and this place was packed. But I know that that's too much to expect, because I know that some of you might go out and get drunk. And if you do, you might die with your boots on. So I'll say goodbye to you now. We often say, well, I believe, yes, I believe. I have never known anyone yet who has had a continuous period of sobriety trying to defy and believe at the same time. Defiance is not reliance. And if it was necessary for Jesus Christ to say, by myself I am nothing, my strength comes from my Father in heaven, who am I, as I said earlier, to stand here and be the judge, jury, and executioner of you? Of course not. Keep God at the steering wheel and stop using him for a spare tire, and your chances are much better to make this deal. We often say, why does a person, after they've been sober 4 or 5 years, go out and get drunk again? It's very simple. After they take the drink, they rebel against good living when they've already failed at bad. They prefer that. As we sit here this morning in this God-given canopy of AA, or as Bill Wilson used to like to call it, the Cathedral of the Spirit, I wonder, and I couldn't help but doing it as I was watching the crowds the last couple of days, thinking what a magnificent thing that this is. You gals who stood by your guy when those clouds were gathering, and when that terrible storm broke, you still stayed. And you gals and guys who have gotten together in AA and tossed that sadness behind you, and you now sit in the sunshine of this fellowship. Yeah, I couldn't help but think of it. You know, my dad was a contractor when I was a little fella. And, matter of fact, if any of you folks have ever, you're acquainted in Detroit, my dad and the Murphy brothers, Will and Sam Murphy, built the Penobscot Towers there, and it's named for the county where Dad and the Murphy boys came from, in Maine. And I can remember Dad as he would talk about architects and specifications and laborers and foundations for his building. And a few 24 hours ago, I decided to build myself an imaginary AA building. And for my building, I've got the greatest architect that's humanly possible to obtain, and my God, as I understand him. The specifications for my building are the 12 steps and the 12 traditions of a deal called Alcoholics Anonymous. I have no labor troubles. I've got you folks, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of you. I can use more sand and water and less cement if I want to in that foundation. I can use plastic instead of the good old-fashioned 2x4s, but I don't want that. I want my foundation to be strong enough and my building rugged enough to withstand one of those twisters or tornadoes that might come whistling against that building of mine in the form of one drink. There's one thing that I do hope and pray for, that I will never think that my building is tall enough to put a roof on it. Now, you know, it's easy to come here and enjoy ourselves, and I wish we could keep this thing going for another week. But we can't. AA is out there. This is the tip of the iceberg in here. And there are dangers, ladies and gentlemen, that hang over our fellowship. Louise and I, Otto, and some of us have traveled in most all sections of America and Canada. And I'm going to tell you that, and I know that they will agree with me. They better, I'm older than they are. There are dangers that hang over our beautiful fellowship. One is placing personalities ahead of AA principles, and the other danger is complacency. Speaking of placing principles ahead of personalities ahead of AA principles, I was talking someplace, I don't know where. I say when you get to be 60 years old, you spend most of your time looking for a bathroom and trying to think of people's names. But I was somewhere. They invited me there to talk, not to speak. That's another thing, these speakers. I don't buy the speaking business. I was invited there to talk, and this lady come waltzing up, very, very fine lady, just before the thing started, and she said, "John, I hope tonight you will mention something about placing personalities ahead of AA principles. We're having trouble with it here. Now, I learned at an early stage of my legal career that when you have a lady for a witness, it's a pretty good idea to get her on and off that witness stand as gracefully and as quickly as possible, because you never know what the hell they might say, you know. So, I'm giving a yes, ma'am, and no, ma'am, and I'm bowing, and just about that time, this gorgeous thing come down the side, and some friends are keeping a couple of chairs for her over here. And she comes down beautifully attired, and as she came by, she looked up and smiled, and I smiled and bowed, and as she kept going, I give her another look. Had a beautiful set of wheels on her. I'll never forget that. And evidently, the old gal noticed me. And she said, John, do you know her? I said, no, I don't, but she's a very fine appearing young lady, isn't she? She says, John, her problem isn't alcohol. Because her problem is sex. Well, I said, I wish to hell that was my problem sometime. And the other danger is complacency. Now, I'm not talking about the guys that stood up there today, stood in here with a 34 or 35 and 31 or 32 or 4, whatever years. No, I'm not talking about the guys with 15, 20 years. No, I'm not talking about the guys with 10 years. No. But I'm talking about these guys, and I know whereof I speak, because it's happened to me. I'm talking about these guys with the 10, 15, 20, 25 years. That when you know them at one time, they couldn't buy a roll of colored toilet paper, but now they've got the wrinkles out of their belly. They got their wife and their families back. They've got the mortgage paid off. And their business is going good. And you meet them on the street, and you say to them, let us sit down there. That's all right. Go ahead, sit on over there. That's all right. That's all right. And you say to them, listen, Joe, or Frank, or Ed, or Tom. Look, we've got some new ones down at the place. And we need some help down there. You haven't been around for 4 or 5 years. Why don't you come down and give us a hand? And here's the shot they'll give you, usually. Well, you know, John, by golly, I'm pretty busy now, you know. And sometimes I have to mow the lawn and at night. And by the way, Helen gave me a new recliner for my birthday. And, you know, it's just at that time that smokestack, what the hell is that, gun smoke comes on. And, I appreciate everything that AA has done for me now. Don't think I haven't. And I'm very grateful for it. Look, if you need anything down there, drop a couple of bucks in the... And as he's walking away, he repeats, well, I'm grateful. I want you to know that. I appreciate everything that AA has done for me. Well, is that so? If their idea of gratitude and their idea of gratefulness is turning their backs on the guys and gals that they've left behind them and the guys and gals that's still out there in the street, to hell with them. I don't care if they never come back. I won't miss them. You know, sometimes, and I'm going to circle the field now and come in, You can be a sober blabbermouth just as easily as you can a drunken one, you know. But you know, sometimes we feel important, you know. Oh, yeah. I got a call and an invitation to come to Scotland and to England last December. And I'm going to tell you, all of a sudden that ego came, whoa. And just as quickly as it came up, it went right out because I thought of those days that I told you about. But we do have a tendency sometimes to feel we're fairly important in this deal. Well, sometimes when you're feeling important, and sometimes when your ego's in bloom, and sometimes when you take it for granted that you're the most important one in this room, and sometimes when you think by your going will leave an unfillable hole, just follow these simple instructions and see how it humbles your soul. Take a pail and fill it with water. Put the hand in it up to the wrist. Pull it out, and the hole that it leaves there is just a measure of how much you'll be missed. Now you can splash all around at the entry and stir up the water galore, but just wait for a minute and it'll look quite the same as before. Now the reason, or the moral for this quaint story, is to do the best that you can. Be proud of yourself, but remember, there's no indispensable man. How true that is. I would rather see a sermon than hear one any day. And I'd rather that you walk with me than merely tell the way. Because the eye is quicker and it's more willing than the ear. And it's your example that makes it mighty clear. Now, the best of preachers are the men who live their creeds. For seeing good put in action is what everybody needs. Now, I can do it if you'll show me how it's done. For I can watch your hands in action, but your tongue too fast might run. Now, the lectures that you deliver, undoubtedly wise and true, but the lesson that I want to learn is by always watching you. For I might not understand that high advice you give, but there's no misunderstanding the way you act and live. You know, God acts in many mysterious ways. And I don't say this in any note of sadness. I say this to point out to anybody here today that may still have some doubt of the spirituality of the program. I'll mention this and I'll sit down. You know, when I was a great guy to get even, I was always going to get even. Until one of you folks said to me, it happened to be one of my sponsors, I have two of them. He said, Johnny, we've been hearing you mention you're always going to get even. You remember who hurt you up there in New England, and you're going to get even. This fellow said, did you ever stop to think, if you want to get even with somebody that's been good to you? That took care of me in a hurry. Remember, when we point our finger at somebody, there's always three pointing back at us. Always remember. Oh. You know, I was married, and I married the daughter of the vice president of the principal power company in New England. Beautiful mother and a beautiful wife. Knew nothing about alcohol, knew nothing about alcoholism. She could drink it and go on about her business. And on the 13th day of October, when I had just come back from off the road that I was telling you about, I stood in the very same courtroom where I had tried many and many a major case, where I once stood with respectability and with dignity, as Louise always speaks about. I stood in the very same courtroom with my neck open, needing a shave, and I'm shaking because, not from fear, I didn't want a drink of wine that morning. I'd long been relegated from the country club and the bourbon set. And I'm shaking. And I asked an acquaintance of mine if he would try, or asked the court if he would entertain the idea of me having custody of my little boy, who was about a year or two old then. And he looked at me and he said, no, he is neither mentally nor physically capable of having custody of his son 30 minutes, to say anything of 30 days. That was on the 13th day of October. And so I walked again. I came into AA on the 28th day of October, as I told you. True alcoholic fashion, you know. Wait, laughter, it's all over. For 15 years, and don't you let me hear any of you guys that think that you're tough try to say that you don't have to be a baby to cry. Because this ex-fighter for 5.5 years experience, this ex-Marine, many a night I walked and I cried. I wanted to go home, but I couldn't. This guy with the 2 degrees, Vanderbilt University, Boston University School of Law, and 2 years in the Harvard Graduate School. I was on the coaching staff there, and I intended to be a coach instead of a lawyer. I wanted to be at first because I believed then, as I believe now, it's much easier to build boys than it is to mend men. That's why I love to see these young people in here. I got sober, and I'm sober 3 years, and I would go home to visit, and I began to get some breaks in the law, in the oil business. Now and then, don't get many now, though, but did then. And I'd go home every year, every other year anyway, to visit Polly and Johnny. And the 15th year that I'd go home, we're walking toward the ocean. We had our own home in Augusta and a summer home in Belfast. You know, it's an odd thing. When something happens, you know, that community property law, and I don't know why, but that community property law, he leaves the community and she gets the property, but that's all. But anyway, we're down at the college, and we're walking toward the ocean. And for the first time in 15 years, she put her arm around my back. And I immediately put mine around hers. We walked a few steps and we stopped. And she said, John, would you promise me something? And I said, of course, certainly. What is it? She said, if anything should happen to me, will you take care of Johnny? And I said, why, sure, of course. I didn't know Polly was dying. The next day I came back to Brownwood, and a couple of days later the phone rang, and it was Johnny. He was a magnificent swimmer, missed the Olympic team that went to Mexico City by the scantest of margin. And he was a senior in high school, and he taught swimming back there in Maine. The phone rang, and I answered it, and it was Johnny. I said, how come? What's going on? He said, well, I'm getting ready to go to college, Dad, you know. I said, yeah, we talked about it. Have you made up your mind where you're going? He had a number of scholarships. He said, no, not yet. He said, I'd like to come out near you. To the man who hadn't been a father for 15 years. The next day I'm on that jet and I'm going back again. A hell of a lot different style. I'd go back and forth then as when I come out in that panel truck sitting on an orange crate for a seat. I went back and we drove back together. And I watched Johnny graduate. I was very proud of him. He's very successful now in the insurance business in Arlington, Texas. Through nothing that I ever did. He gives me a hell of a lot more credit than what I really deserve, and I know it. But his second year that he was in college, he went back to Maine and we're drilling in Holbrook, Arizona. Now I want to point out to you how God acts in many mysterious ways. That's why that I'm such a believer in prayer today. Now we had our trailer parked between Twin Buttes on account of the weather, and we could hardly reach Holbrook, 14 miles away, on the mobile phone. This particular day, my partner said, well, let's go in. It's about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Never left a lease in my life in 26 years. At that time of day, always stayed till dark or maybe later. And I said, all right. And we go into the trailer, we go in, and just before I said, well, why not leave the horn on? Maybe that thing will come in out there. And we laughed, you know. I'm not in that trailer 2 or 3 minutes, and the horn began to honk, and I went out and answered it. And I tell you today, as this is as true as I stand behind this podium, it was my son Johnny, 3,200 miles away in Belfast, Maine. I could hear him as clearly as you can hear me now. Bear in mind, we had trouble getting 14 miles. Here is 3,200 miles, and as clearly as I'm talking to you, he said, Dad, Mother passed away this noon. Would you please come home? And it was you folks, members of Alcoholics Anonymous, who made it possible for me to return to my native city, in my native state, and stand beside my son at the graveside of his mother once more, a useful and a decent person. My God, why shouldn't I come among you? And you still continue to help me. I'm a great believer in prayer. And I've heard many, many prayers. But the prayer that is so apropos to me was given to me by a full-blooded little Navajo fella up on the Indian reservation in Arizona. His name was Tommy Dwyer. And we're talking about spirituality of the program, and Tommy said, you may not believe this, John, but many of our braves are highly spiritual. And he said, my grandfather handed us a prayer, and you might be able to use it in AA. This was in 1956. It appeared in the Grapevine years later over someone else's name, and I met this individual and asked if he wrote it, and Chief Judge said no, he never had even heard of it. But I call it was so apropos to me. I don't know about you, but it was so apropos to me. I asked Tommy if I could have it, and he said sure. Of course, and I wrote it down. And it goes like so. O Great Spirit, I hear your voice in the winds that breathes life into all the world. Hear me. I'm small and I'm weak. I need your strength and your wisdom that you have hidden under every leaf and stone. Let me always walk with beauty, and my eyes ever behold the red and purple sunset. Make me wise so I will know what you have told my people, and make my hands always respect the things that you have made, and my ears sharp so I will always hear your voice. O Great Spirit, I seek this strength and this wisdom, not to be greater than my brother, but to fight my greatest enemy, myself. And when my days are ending as the shadows leave the sunrise, may my spirit stand straight before your eyes without shame. And I know that when Dr. Bob and Bill and Ebby Thatcher and the rest of the gang, they look down upon us today from their Valhalla, and I know they're there. If we could hear Dr. Bob and Bill, they'd be saying to Jack Johnson and Jimmy Johnson and all the rest who's had anything to do with this grand get-together, we would hear them say to those folks, and to you folks who have attended this thing, good work. Keep going. Don't get discouraged. Keep trying to carry the message to that still suffering alcoholic. You know, I said briefly the other day, God must have been feeling very good when he made this part of the country and put folks like you in it. And in closing, may I say thank you for the invitation to come here. And thank God for the creation of those two beloved men, Dr. Bob and Bill, and that little fellow who went to Bill on that November night in 1934, Ebby Thatcher. Thank you, and God bless every single one of you.
Let's all join in the Lord's Prayer. Thank you, John. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil.